Why not let me go live? Oh, hey, good morning.
Good morning.
And this has been talking about leading through crisis. This has been one heck of a morning for me for sure. But you can see if you're watching, it's a little bit different than normal. But we'll get through all we'll get through all of this. Uh, so Isamar, you've had an interesting couple of days or
I
weeks.
have. I have. It started New Year's Eve. Started New Year's Eve and I was just going along with the storm. And before midnight, I had my neighbor's tree fall on their roof. We're neighbors of a duplex, so I felt the house shake. I immediately went into like, where did that happen? And then we had to go, had to get a go bag, had to collect all our things, and just go through the storm. And then New Year's Day in the morning, I get a call for deployment. It first starts off as like, "Good morning, Happy New Year's." And it's like, "Happy New Year's!" Like, what a great call. And then it's like, "Do you wanna come work?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. The storm was pretty bad. I mean, my tree blew down next door." And they're like, "Oh, you don't know what happened." I was like, "No, turn on the news." I was like, "I don't have TV." And then they sent me a link, and that's when I found out about the localized flooding on the highway, on California's Highway 99. And then I heard more news reports of weather, because then I tuned into the weather, and it's storm after storm after storm. And so I was like, all right, let me switch my go bag from get out of the house to go bag on deployment real quick, and I'll be right there. So it's just been storm after storm, and it's as my first time being in an EOC, as like actually deployed on an incident. It's fun. It's fun. It's a great learning opportunity. And I use fun sparingly, right? Because I know that if I were to say this to other audiences, it would come off kind of like odd and awkward and like, how dare you not care, right? But in good company, in emergency management, it's very much it's understood. It's understood.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what you're talking about as far as the fun part. It's definitely everything you've trained for, everything that you want to do. You're eventually to get it. And it's funny you say that, and talk about military times. You know, the deployments are scary. They're not. Going into battle is not ever great, but this is what the guys want to do. This is at least the young guys. After they've done it a couple times, maybe not, but that's the same thing here. Is that you're getting to the point to where you're like, hey, I want to get deployed. I want to go out and do it. I've done all this theory, and I'm able to put it into practice now. So leadership. What was your experience in general, just in when you saw not just leadership with where you're working at your EOC specifically, but across the board from up and down the state, and this is truly for some like myself. I'm here in Southern California. We got rain, we got wet. There's some coastal flooding and things like this, but at the end of the day, I was able to drive down the road and go to the store without getting my car flooded. It just rained on us. Then you have people that are up in areas where roads are closed and cars are under the water. I think 17 people, as far as I know, as of today, died of various different reasons during this time. What did you see? What did you learn from the leadership of this event?
Oh man, with this event, I think everyone's leaning forward and grabbing. I mean, theoretically or figuratively, they're grabbing people by the arm and taking them with them on their hip, and it's just kind of like learning as we go. This is the thing that I need you to do right now, and it's no reflection on what your worth is or anything like that. You have to play a part. And I think with having people learn how to communicate that effectively is is really a really big point on leadership, because it comes down to like your values. You want to be helpful. So it's just like you are helpful in this capacity. Another learning opportunity I was provided in regards to leadership was, I noticed that in our Emma requests, the leadership would always, and I know these individuals as leaders, and they're coming in as other players, but they always are very observant. They will observe first, and based on their experience, they'll take it. They'll take the experience with a grain of salt, because it's a different jurisdiction that they're used to, a different organization than they're used to. But some things never change, like personalities. Personalities they differ between sections, EOC sections. And I think having that type of introspective thinking, being able to assess what's going on around you and shift always on a dime, right? Like on a dime. I think that's a big leadership skill that I was able to observe others do. I cannot hear you.
When people are public facing, and leading the citizen, right? Telling them what to do. What were some of the challenges that you were facing as an organization, not necessarily you individually, dealing with communication to the public as far as like what the storm is doing and where the flooding is occurring, where to stay away from?
I think there's two individuals that you speak to, and again, I don't have this much experience on this, but I believe from what I can see so far, there are two types of individuals you speak to the public: those that trust the government and those that do not trust the government. And either way, you still have to make it so that it's just common language. It hits everyone all at the same time. And I think the struggles here were because, well, it's, why am I still under a type of warning or an emergency messaging right now if I see blue skies? And I think it's kind of hard because California's geography is very dynamic. If the storm up in the mountains, you're going to have the runoff come down and affect rivers and other waterways. So I think that was the bigger concern, at least from what I could see, that it's just like, all right, well, this messaging is out here, but it's blue skies, but we're still expecting something to happen. So
yeah, I remember when I was a first responder, every time that we had rain, we knew we were pulling somebody out of a river somewhere, and the swiftwater rescue teams, we're always like pre-deploying those guys and position them to areas where we had a history of vehicles, we're plucking people out, and it was always a thing. And I think sometimes people don't realize how fast that water truly is moving. They're used to the San Gabriel River, for instance, down here in Southern California, just being this trickle, and then when the storms come, it's a raging river for sure. So the turnaround, don't drown programs and things like this that we try and we implement sometimes is not heeded, and it creates a lot of, and that's a lot of the people who perished kind of fell into that category where they tried to pass through rivers and stuff. And
I think it's helpful to also not let a crisis go to waste. If you're aware of messaging that needs to, weird language, I understand, but in this regard, it would be like, if we could do messaging better, like this would be the messaging, like, hey, like I've already, because these storms, rather, let me backwards. Okay, so because the storms are so statewide, I was actually able to have conversations with my family in regards to like, hey, are you signed up with your county or your local jurisdiction's alert warnings or alert messaging and alert platform? Are you aware of where, the resources lie? Do you know who to contact? Do you know if it's 211, 311, things of that nature? Because 911 is going to get inundated with calls. And if you have like I've had to have these conversations with my family, and it's not, before it was like, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, you do things that are emergency. And now it's more like, oh my gosh, what other information do I need? It's like, don't. And in my mind, it's like, don't let a crisis go to waste. I'm going to now educate my family over what resources they should be looking at within their counties.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's not a bad way of saying it. It's been said before, so. But
I
yeah, I
sound
mean, right. Yeah, no, the idea there is right, because like people are now aware and they're hyper aware, and this is time when messaging makes sense, right? We talk about it after an earthquake, right? This is why we hit it hard with the preparedness messages right after those small earthquakes, right? As we call them, the wake up call. We've had a lot of wake up calls, and even with preparedness has been really, it's one of those hard things to get through to people, right, on the preparedness side. And even with this rain, like myself, here we are, in Southern California, where we had significant rain. I mean, it rained for days, but we didn't have any damage. Well, at least by where I'm at, we didn't really have any damages or anything like this. I live in the hills, so it's not like I could potentially have landslides and stuff. And if you look at the hills behind me, there's scarring on the side of the ravines and things that show that there's been historic landslides and stuff there. So it's not something out of the ordinary, but there aren't any roads and stuff associated with it. So I think that's probably why a lot of people aren't concerned. But if you go up into here in Orange County, like Majestic Canyon or Santiago Canyon or those areas up there, they've had more history of landslides and stuff, so I'm sure they're a little bit more prepared for that than those that are over by where I'm at. So I think there's some historic context as well. So yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with using this particular event to try to get preparedness message out to people, and hopefully have a relationship with the news media to be able to reach the broader audience for that. And speaking of this preparedness, the city, and I don't mean to out anybody individually, but this is just stuff that's hit the news. I don't have any insight of what the decision making was or why this was said. But the city of San Francisco, the mayor comes out and says the reason why we were unprepared for this event is because of the National Weather Service. And that was number one. The National Weather Service is a wonderful organization. They put their products out there really early. They're telling you what's going on. They have nothing to do with individual jurisdictions' preparedness plans at all. They might be part of it regarding that the jurisdiction says we will look at the National Weather Service for information, but the National Weather Service has never written the preparedness plan for an organization or a response plan for a jurisdiction. They might help in giving you information, but that's about it. What is up with that? And like, what was your reaction to that specifically?
I thoroughly read that article. I saw that come out and I was like, wow. But I thoroughly read that article, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe the city and county of San Francisco replied back, and they let, I think it was like a misunderstanding on the comment, as opposed, because it's like, we are not trying to offend NWS, National Weather Service. They actually were they are and continue to be a very valuable partner in this storm. We were in constant communication with them. So, and I'm paraphrasing, but it very much, I believe that Office of Emergency Management was able to kind of move that narrative around and be like, no, we actually were in communication with NWS. So, I mean, I believe politics will surround every crisis no matter what. So it's kind of needing to plug in your PIOs into our crises a little bit more, because then that would have, I think, the response to the claim that we weren't prepared, or that's the reason why we weren't prepared. I think they did well to rebuttal that.
Yeah, I mean, I read that and I was like, I mean, that's a mayor, elected official. Sometimes they say things under frustration, under confusion and not understanding. Um, you know, but I'm going to hold her feet to the fire on this one. Mayor of London. If you don't know, and this is a message to your elected officials right now. If you don't know the situation, if you don't understand what's going on, defer to your experts before you say something, because I mean that's an embarrassment, to your organization, to make it sound as if your emergency managers aren't doing their job and preparing for these disasters. Now, maybe they didn't, and if that's the case, then is it time for you to take a look, knowing the team in San Francisco. They're highly skilled and talented emergency managers, so I would doubt that that's the case. But I mean, as a mayor, you really threw them under the bus, and it was a disservice. And I'm gonna, you know, I'm not gonna apologize for the mayor, but I'm sorry that the city of San Francisco's emergency management office is going through that, and I'm sure that it was maybe misspoken, or maybe taken. I don't think it was taken out of context, but the people of San Francisco need to know that their emergency management division, OMD, I think it's called, or department, is doing well, and they're talented people in that office.
It's almost like a sense of pride, actually, knowing that I may not know these people individually, but the fact that I am a part of this network, I'm a part of this profession. I know that. So, for instance, I know that the city and county of San Francisco, we know that there are great leaders over there. There are great leaders in very many other jurisdictions. And it's almost like it's a sense of calm. Like, yep, that county's covered.
Yeah.
They have great leaders in charge of their emergency management areas of expertise, and like they've got it covered.
Yeah. And Matt Green, hi, how you doing? Thanks for joining us. It's awesome to see you. And you're absolutely right, Matt. Leaders delegate tasks, but they can't delegate accountability. I learned that as a young guy in the military. And you're right, it's not a great look for the mayor. And I think the mayor owes her staff definitely an apology publicly, since she since she said this publicly. I don't know if she will. I don't know if she has that fortitude to do that. I don't know her as a person or as a mayor. I just know what I see in the news. And yeah, it's a sad day when you see the mayors try to throw their emergency managers under the bus. But it seems to be, going back to leading, it seems to be that emergency management during a crisis, when things go sideways, it happened during Katrina. It happened, in other places as well, where when things go sideways, the emergency manager is the person who gets thrown under the bus. I mean, Michael Brown, I don't know if it's been many years, but he was fired as FEMA, head of FEMA, by the Bush administration when things didn't go well. And it's his call. It's his, he's in the hot seat, if you will. But was it really Michael Brown's fault that things went sideways? If you study that closely, it wasn't the president's fault either, for that matter. But when all disasters are local, but it seems to be that emergency managers, we tend to be a easy target for removal when things go a little bit sideways. Why do you see? I don't say why do you see, because I know why it's political. But when that goes back to it, as somebody who's young and getting into this field, how do you see this happening with you regarding leading during a crisis, and your head being on the chopping block when things don't go necessarily as well as they could?
Yeah, that's actually been when I first got into local government, that was one of the things that my previous employer, or my boss, actually mentioned. Like, when you make a decision, as long as you can tell me why you made the decision, I will back you up, because that wasn't afforded before. And I think as long as we're essentially training those who are coming into the field with this mindset already that we have to be ready for being ousted. We have to be ready for, we have to be politically savvy in our words, in our demeanor. We need to be just all the time ready and on. I think that's the bigger component. And another thing is that if we get to the point, or rather when we get to the point that the profession is an actual like salt on the earth kind of profession, right? Like there's firefighters, there's emergency doctors, there's emergency managers. Like when it becomes a full-blown profession and it's advocated for in local government, in legislation, when it gets to that point, I think it'll be a little bit better. But moving forward, that's what I have in my mind, is that, all right, this is also a political game as much as it is about saving lives.
So as a leader, right, and you're taking a team forward, how do you advocate for them in your mind during a crisis? How do you advocate for your team to the political leadership?
Oh.
Come on, I know you somewhere. You know I have to ask those.
How would I don't have enough politic training yet. But it would fall. I think it would just fall along the same lines of like, this is the reason why I'm employed by you. Like, you want us to do the job of saving your constituents. We have the same priorities in mind. It's basically just creating that type of buy-in from the person of, look, your priorities are my priorities, and this is how we're doing it.
I have a friend of mine who told me this story, and I think it's funny. I won't out him because we'll talk to him later. But anyway, so he's working this event, and the mayor wanted to wanted to claim himself as the incident commander.
Ooh.
And he had that conversation with the hard talk, saying, okay, this is what this means, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you have to have it happen. And then finally the mayor was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to defer over to somebody who's a professional, knows what they're doing. But I think sometimes people see the term or see what's going on, and they want to take control due to ego, not necessarily due to skill. And I find that kind of interesting as well, that people want to, for whatever reason, and maybe it's ego, maybe it's machismo, or I guess it's sort of the same thing, but that bravado, or whatever term that you want to add into that, whatever adjective you want to push in there. But when you see this happening, I think sometimes you have to have that real conversation with the person who's the leader, the political leader, and say, this is who we are, this is what we do. I will follow your orders, but knowing that once you do this, this all falls onto your lap. And I think sometimes then they'll take a back and go back to the policy. The joke always is when you create the policy room, make it as far away from the emergency operations center as possible. Yes, part of me understands that and says yes, but kind of laughs. But the other side of it too is you really need to train your political leadership what emergency management does prior to an event.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, they are the ones, as Matt pointed out, they are the ones that are going to be held accountable. Even if they fire their emergency manager, they're going to lose their job. We can go back all the way to Katrina again with Ray Nagin and Blanco, the Ray Nagin being the mayor of New Orleans and Blanco being the governor of Louisiana. Both of them in the next election lost their job, and they will be voted out, right? So they don't want to lose their job. They have their personal pride and stuff associated with it, and so it does. Even though they tried to say, oh, we're going to get rid of this decision maker, this municipal worker, this emergency manager, we saw it happen during COVID, right? People are
policies are still in place, politics are still in play. It's not the person, it's the system.
Yeah. you know. So yeah, so the elected official, is held accountable in one way or the other. But I think it's even worse when they like did what the mayor did and tried to throw their organization. Um, well, they even tried to throw their organization, and I should probably say it this way: they try to throw another organization under the bus, you know, which is kind of interesting. Matt says, my opinion that psychological safety paramount is here. The high consequences and the perception of high consequences leads to absolutely overly adverse decision making, ineffective staff that don't have the agency to act, and a stagnant. Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Absolutely. Making decisions and making things out of fear of anything new is not great. And I mean that's one of these issues, right? Is that sometimes I think politicians make decisions out of fear more than emergency managers. But the other side of it too is if you're working for an organization where you can't approach the policy room and have frank conversations with them, that's not an organization that I don't think I really want to be involved with.
I would not
Now,
either.
now you're still out there, in the game. What are you looking for in an employer when it comes to leadership?
The mentee mentor relationship, definitely. Psychological safety, like Matt Green had mentioned, that is paramount. I want to be able to have that relationship and have that be one of their priorities as well, because then I can have frank conversations without fear, and it could literally be a learning opportunity every day when I go in. Those are two very big things, and I think the mentor mentee relationship will also go into like apprenticeship, right? Like you're basically trying to download your mind into mine, and I need to do that quickly. But just the openness, right? Like stagnation will be the killer of everything, because we don't want to move, whether it be out of fear, whether it be out of policy. Just stagnation will be, I don't want to say the death of us, because that's a little grave, but it won't result in much. So I think being open, like literally being open to thought and to new ideas, that'd be good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for being here. And yes, Isamar, she is the future of emergency management. That's for sure.
Thank you.
That's a good statement. There was a city that's by me, and they, for the longest time, they couldn't keep an emergency manager hired. They would hire them. They would only last a year, and there's sort of big rotation. And I was kind of really curious about why that was. Number one, they weren't. They It was an emergency manager name, and they were more of an analyst. Didn't pay very well. I mean, that's one part of it. So you were getting younger, newer people into the position, and as soon as they could move, they did. And I eventually met up with one of the people who worked there. I said, "What's going on with that department? Like, why is it such a rotating door?" And they said, "Well, the leadership at the city was just toxic, and they wouldn't let them do what they're supposed to do. They didn't trust them. They were there as the emergency manager by name, but they wouldn't let the department do what it's supposed to do, or the individual. And they blamed the city manager on that case. And I was like, wow, that's that kind of sucks, and I guess it's one of those things where they didn't take what the profession was of emergency management seriously enough. So it's kind of sad to see, but then it goes back to leadership. Now, luckily for that city, that it's kind of a landlocked city, doesn't really have any areas that would have, outside of earthquake, I would guess would be the largest problem that they would have. But maybe that's why they didn't take emergency management seriously, because they didn't have any super high threat areas. But my point about it though was, sometimes leadership doesn't see the position of emergency management as a useful position until they need to use it as a as a block for them getting in trouble.
Yeah,
So,
that, and that's a larger conversation about funding. We don't have, most agencies that I've heard of in states don't have their own allocated funds for when things hit the fan, right? It's always just part of their department money, and then you have to ask for the reimbursement, go through the process of FEMA. But it speaks to how much your I guess the politics are playing into that department. And then the other side of the money coin is how much the emergency manager is getting paid. Thankfully,
yeah.
now in certain states we can see the wage, but I've known many individuals who have just been like, this is a great position, it would be a great fit, but that is not my wage.
Right.
Like, I am worth more than that.
Yep, that's the only way it's going to be good. That's going to be moved for sure. Is when
Yeah.
people understand what their value truly is to the organization and demand,
Demand more.
demand more. Well, we're getting here close to the end of our time here, but before we let everybody leave, I want to make a little bit of an announcement. So Isamar Garcia, joining the network, she's actually going to be on this program a little bit more, so you get to get more of Isamar's insight. So I'm excited to have that conversation with her, and that she agreed to actually, hang out with me more. That's kind of nice.
Oh no, what I signed up for.
So, but we have some great guests coming up here in the future. We're going to be revamping, not revamping, but kind of moving the direction of what we're talking about here more into realistically into leadership, into management, and not necessarily into reviewing every crisis that comes down the pipeline here. But this happened to be one that we needed to talk about, and I think it was important too. And Isamar, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being part of what we're doing. And I'm really proud of you, of what you've done in emergency management as in the short time, and you really are making a difference. And as Matt said, you are the future of emergency management, and it's great to see you part of this.
Well, thank you. I have great leaders showing me the way.
All right, everybody, until next time, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, stay safe, stay hydrated.